All right. Howdy, guys. With me today are Douglas Dindy, Damian Salazar, Dylan Montgomery, and I'm Riley Eggmeyer. Today, we're going to be talking about how safety in cotton gins during COVID-19 and how to continue their operations safely. We'll be speaking on a flow analysis and how the flow of individuals affects all workers in and outside the gin. We'll cover potential solutions and explain how each one of them will be implemented. We have created a decision matrix that shows the pros and cons of each of our potential solutions. We'll finally end it off with the selection analysis, showing kind of what direction we're going to go in with our potential solutions. Gins are essential to keep open, so we can't have any outbreaks that will potentially shut down operations for a few days. So the problem is, how do we keep workers safe and healthy during a worldwide pandemic known as COVID-19? This can be very difficult due to many employees living together on site, but every gin is different, so there's no set in stone solution for all gins. If someone comes down with COVID, it can be very difficult to figure out who and how many people that person came into contact to before realizing they were infected.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Douglas Dendy. I conducted the flow analysis for my team for this section of the project. So here for the next couple minutes, I'm just going to be talking about what it is that I found during this process. So a traditional flow analysis would be done by analyzing the flow of materials through a system, such as a manufacturing plant or something of that sort. This flow analysis deviated from that in that we were analyzing the flow of individuals rather than materials through the system. This was done inside gin facilities as well as elsewhere, and we believe it's incredibly important in order to understand where outbreaks could possibly originate, as well as how do we prevent that from happening in the first place. So inside gin facilities specifically, I attempted to obtain some data values to include here. However, what I was looking for wasn't available on the internet, and the individuals that I reached out to through email didn't get back to me. So what I do know is that employees are entering and physically clocking in one area, which is a weak point for viral transmission within the gin facility itself. This is due to employees congregating in one area all together, one after the other, and physically touching the same surface. So if we wanted to eliminate this, we could switch to a virtual system. There are several businesses that offer this as a service where if it were implemented at the cotton gins, then gin crew employees or office employees would be able to virtually clock in via their cell phones or laptop computer or whatever device it is that they want to use. And this would just completely eliminate that congregation of people around the time cards or whatever physical system is currently being used inside of the gin facility. And then after employees are clocking in, they're moving throughout the facility to operate various gin machinery. And in doing so, they're often within 6 feet of each other. So again, this is a weak point for viral transmission. However, as was previously stated by Riley, all of these gins are unique, and there's not always enough physical space to allow 6 feet of distancing for each individual person inside of the gin. So all we can really do to minimize this, if there is not enough space to keep employees separate while they're flowing throughout the facility, is to just ensure that these employees are remaining diligent and cautious about coronavirus and ensuring that they're wearing masks and just doing what they can to remain as socially distant from each other as they can. And then, of course, there are the module truck drivers who are arriving intermittently throughout the day, dropping off X number of loads daily. These truck drivers are frequently exiting the cabs of their trucks and having discussions with either the module feeders or other gin crew employees. So moving forward, we need to keep these truck drivers inside of the cabs of their trucks so they're not flowing into the system and mixing together two different groups of employees. And then outside gin facilities, this is where things really start to get difficult when analyzing the flow of individuals. So some gins have pod-style housing and some do not. What I've found is that pod-style housing dramatically decreases the likelihood of exposure. And this is due to all of these gym crew employees living and working in the same groups. So after work, they are not venturing out to various geographical locations and intermixing with a bunch of different groups of people. So pod style housing greatly decreases the number of avenues that coronavirus could infiltrate that gym crew. And then conversely, non pod style housing, employees are all venturing out to their houses after work on a daily basis and are intermixing with either their family members or roommates. And this is what really throws a wrench in management's effort to limit coronavirus. Because even if you can implement some policy that encourages your employee to remain diligent and cautious about coronavirus while they're outside of gym facilities, there is no way to guarantee that their family members or roommates are being equally as cautious as your employee is. And this lack of caution on their roommates' side completely negates any work that the employee has done previously to remain cautious about coronavirus, because any of their family members or roommates, especially now with the new Texas mask mandate, they can go out to bars or restaurants or whatever avenue they may choose and get infected with the disease, bring it back home, give it to that gym crew employee who will then spread it to the rest of the gym crew. So due to all of these variables and just the general uncertainty and lack of control over individuals while they're outside of the gyms, it's just incredibly difficult to monitor employee exposure that way. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Dylan, who's going to keep going for us.
Thanks, Douglas. My name is Dylan Montgomery. I'm going to cover our potential solutions that we've come up with as a team. So our team determined that we feel there's no one-size-fits-all kind of solution as far as physical solutions are considered. Considering every cotton gin is different, potential areas of transmission may vary from gin to gin. So suggesting that a physical barrier, in one location may work for some gins but may not work for every gin. So we felt that procedural/managerial solutions could be a better avenue to take as far as potential solutions for this problem are concerned. First potential solution is creating a decision tree. This will allow for a more standardized decision-making process, which is one of the issues that gym managers have been facing, not knowing, who needs to quarantine for how long, who needs to self-isolate, who needs to get tested, and different things like that. There's several factors that will play part in this decision tree and determining who needs to quarantine for how long. And then this can also be used to determine, needs for testing of employees and different things like that. For our second one, we consider an industry mask mandate. As of yesterday, and Governor Greg Abbott, the Texas mask mandate has ended, and it's on industries to make their mask mandates throughout their industry. So cotton gins already follow many safety procedures through OSHA or different avenues. This would be just another one of those safety procedures that gins could follow. Masks are very common within the gin to protect from dust and other particles. If you go within a gin, you'll see many people wearing masks or gaiters just to protect from the particles that are floating around inside the gin. So it would not be a stretch for the rest of the interior employees to be wearing them. However, masks within gin offices are much less common. We see the same people come into work every day, so they feel like they can, they don't need a mask when they're with their coworkers, even though they may go home to their families every night. So that's one potential area where a mask mandate while at work could be potentially helpful. For our third potential solution, we talked about an employee self-screening process, would basically where we would familiarize the gym employees with different symptoms of COVID-19, and they would be required to screen themselves each day before coming into work. This would include taking their temperatures and just going through a checklist of symptoms just to ensure that they're not coming to work with already showing symptoms, thus, spreading it to the rest of the gym crew. However, this could prove difficult to implement and operate because it relies solely on the employee accurately screening themselves every day. But we could also, implement the decision tree that we talked about as a potential solution that could be used by each employee each day. So they could go through the decision tree and decide, do I need to go into work today? different things like that. So those are the potential solutions that we have come up with as a team. I'm going to pass it off to Damien now to go through our decision-making process.
Thank you, Dylan. I'm Damien Salazar, and I worked on doing the decision matrix for our presentation and project. And I want to start by just talking about the criteria that we used for this, and it's going to be cost, safety, the viability on how to implement and execute everything, and just how effective each potential solution is in just limiting the spread of corona. And it's cost. I mean, cost is just simple. How much will it cost each gen to just set everything up and implement it? Safety is it actually a safe thing to do? Can we do this? And is it something that can work to mitigate the spread? Viability, just how easy is it to stop it? And effectiveness, overall, just what is, or how good is the option and the solution. Next slide, please. So with our first potential solution, it was the decision tree type thing, and it ended up coming out with a rating of 88.55 out of 10, which was really high, and it was a little lower than I expected though, but I'll get into the reasons. So the cost, it shouldn't cost too much to implement this, mostly because it's mostly going to be rules and guidelines through like kind of a booklet type thing that you can go around and just scroll through, figure out, look at the information you need, keep track of data. So it shouldn't cost too much. It can be easily implemented once all the rules and everything are put together. It's kind of just there for you. One thing though that is a little complicated is the guidelines do seem to be changing very frequently, especially here in Texas with the whole mask mandate being lifted yesterday and announced a week before. But this one solution can easily help just determine which employees need to quarantine, isolate, and everything. You can have just a a manager type person just gather information from each employee. Just go around every day, ask them a few questions. You can get it done, see who they've been around, and etc. Next slide. So so for the second one, that's basically just a mask, like trying to require a mask mandate for all personnel in and around the gen, which it doesn't help with information, and that's a big reason why it has a lower rating than the previous one at 87.2. It can somewhat be more costly depending on if the employer wants to provide, say, the N95 mask for every employee, and you're gonna have to get an increased amount depending on if you're already using masks for dust and everything. But the overall price shouldn't be too much of a change. It just should be more. And we feel that this solution might work best as a complement to, say, like solution 1 or solution 3, just because you can't really determine anything from what employees have to say from this, because it's just they wear a mask and you go on and about your day. It's just not very effective in terms of knowledge, basically, is what I'm trying to get to. Next slide, please. So with potential solution number 3, it receives kind of a failing grade for a few reasons, with a 69.25 out of 100. And it requires too much self-regulation by each employee. Like every day, they're going to have to just know who they were around. If they think they may have it, they could be scared to miss work, especially if you're an hourly employee. You don't want to be missing work. And I've always been told never to trust what the employee says about their own health, because they usually try to hide things that'll keep them from work. And that's a big thing. This solution also, it would be really easy to manipulate by the employees, because again, you would just have to take them by their word. The implementation as well, it may not go over well, because a lot of employees tend to fight back when they have to regulate themselves. It's easier for some at least to just go into what's already established. And if it's something that's kind of required by the job and asked about daily, they can get into a rhythm. But they just tend not to be able to go around and give you the proper information themselves. And that's why this one receives such a low rating, because it's just not very viable or effective to mitigate the spread. And I will now pass this off to Riley to close this.
So when selecting a solution for this problem, you have to kind of look at it through a manager standpoint. Like, how easy can it be implemented, or like, will the employees actually obey the given protocols? Employee behavior can be one of the most difficult things to enforce. And you can see from our decision matrix that effectiveness is weighted the most, due to being the most important to when it actually comes to solving the problem. And as you can tell, our first potential solution, the decision tree, is rated the most effective. And you can also tell that the effectiveness criteria corresponds with the total weighted sum. So that's a pretty important criteria when it comes to selecting a solution. We're kind of narrowing down our decision to go with our first potential solution, which is the decision tree. This solution is the easiest to implement, and it requires the least amount of cooperation from workers. And it's also the easiest to determine contact tracing, figuring out who came into contact with who and what happened, when it happened. But that still doesn't mean that we're 100% choosing the solution, as we're still gaining knowledge on other solutions to improve our decision making. But we feel comfortable that we'll make the right decision to make cotton gins as safe as possible through this pandemic. Where we're at today, we're finalizing our potential solutions. As I said before, we're still gaining as much information as possible to make sure we're implementing the perfect solution. We're going to begin working on identifying our recommended solution and conducting our economic analysis to see where all of our solutions kind of look from an economic standpoint. Our next meeting will be on March 23rd. And now, if y'all have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we let the client go first?
Can you go back to a slide that shows the 3 potential solutions? Is there one that shows what the 3 are? I was getting lost as to which one was 1, 2, and 3.
No, sir.
Okay, let's go to the table.
Potential solution 1.
Go to the table then. There we go. Okay, so I guess tell me which one is solution 1?
Decision tree will be solution 1.
Okay, and so, all right, and then what was 2?
2 will be the industry mask mandate.
Okay, so 2 would just be a mask mandate and nothing else.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Okay, and then 3 was the temperature. Take each worker taking their own temperature before they come.
Yeah, the self-employee self-screening process.
Okay. And what was what was the thinking behind the viability of the masks being a 1 on both of those? Or I guess I get why the 1, do you have a 1 on the decision tree, but how did you come up with a 1 on the mask?
So with the one for the mask on solution 2, the 1 on viability is just, it's really viable. You can do it like without really any hesitation or like struggle. It's just something you can just tell your employees, hey, like we're gonna need you to just start wearing masks like everywhere in here. There's not too much of an issue with that. That's just what we kind of felt.
But I can understand why you're asking about that one, because I know a lot of these areas where the cotton gins may not have ever had a mask requirement. So yeah, we may need to reevaluate that one, because we may see potential more pushback from employees who haven't been required to wear a mask anywhere else. And now that the mask mandate for the state's been lifted, there may be even more if we were to implement it now.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, I'm sure all of you have done every single thing your employers ever asked you in every job you've done, but there are some who aren't as good at y'all at that. And effectiveness, so the decision tree gets a 0.95 and the mask get a 0.8. How do you, I guess, tell me about your thinking on that.
So the reason for this mainly has to come with the information that you're able to gather, because with just the mask, you're not able to know like directly as the employer. A lot more information needed to determine like who is sick and stuff. And with the decision tree, you're able to make more decisions on telling which employees like that they need to get tested or stay home and stuff. It's mainly knowledge that affected the overall effectiveness part, along with just like basic things like the spread, like what can help mitigate the spread in general, such as wearing a mask.
And I guess so with the decision tree, what decisions would you end up with? I guess I'm trying to figure out the decision tree. You would be making decisions on grouping employees and keeping employees separate and things like that. Is a part of your decision tree? Is that?
Yes, it's going to have like many different options on like which employees you can group together, who's been infected, how long employees should be like, how long they should isolate themselves and stay away from the work sites, just various things like that. There's a lot of decisions that will be going into this.
And it can also be, if an employee was to come with symptoms or something, you'd use a decision tree and determine if they were within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes of somebody who was sick. That would lead to them needing to self-isolate for 10 days according to CDC guidelines. If they were within 3 feet for less, more than between 5 to 10 minutes, then that would also immediately require self-isolation. So making decisions like that based on criteria of how close they were. If they just went to a general meeting, say they went to church and they weren't close to somebody who potentially got sick, but it would provide more of a if they had hand-to-hand contact with somebody who has a positive test, making a decision, do they need to self-isolate or can they continue to work, different things like that.
And I guess that's where, okay, so are you guys envisioning a decision tree that would be used after you had a potential exposure, or would it be something that you would use right at the beginning of ginning season as you're setting up your work crews, or is it both?
So we're kind of thinking right now is, it's going to be used just all throughout the ginning season. Just anytime there's employees, it's something that you can look at, especially at the start of the season. That way you can gather information and make sure everyone shows up to work and gets where they need to be safely. But you can use it when there's an outbreak, before there's an outbreak, after there's an outbreak. It's sort of an all-time, all-season use type of thing.
And I know when we talked to you after the last meeting, you had mentioned that it's been one of the issues that gin managers have faced is not knowing who needs to quarantine, for how long, mm-hmm. And especially with the the CDC guidelines for quarantine times and self-isolation times changing all the time. We felt that this could be, the decision tree for one could be potentially utilized to help make a standardized who needs to quarantine for how long. That way gin managers aren't struggling to keep track of I'm not sure. I think it's 14. If one thinks it's 14 days, another one thinks it's 10. And they potentially come back too soon and still spread. So we envisioned it more, utilizing if there was a potential outbreak or potential infection of a single employee. So using it different ways like that.
Yeah, can we kind of use like afterwards, after an outbreak or something, like kind of like giving them a survey or something, like if this happens, this, and then you need to do this, or if this happens, you need to do this kind of thing.
Well, I guess I was just looking at all this and thinking about it. I mean, I could see where a decision tree might have something in it, like if you have an outbreak in the facility, or if there's increased outbreaks in town, the decision tree might cause you to add masks to your workers. It might cause you to implement solution 2 and solution 3 as a part of the decision tree.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, and sorry to interrupt, but just to kind of point out, we're not deciding between machine A and machine B in our decision matrix. They're not mutually exclusive. So how do y'all propose that, where you could potentially implement all of them or some of them? I mean, how do you address that?
Well, there could be some sort of scenario where masks could be implemented as a part of solution 1, the decision tree, in that if a employee is satisfying certain criteria for potentially being exposed, then you could require them to wear masks until they exit the facility, something of that sort. Solution 2 is kind of meant to be implemented as a complement to either solution 1 or solution 3. So it's not purchasing one machine or the other. It's kind of trying to combine them into a way that most effectively accomplishes our goal.
But I think also for solution 3, I think Dr. Harden makes a good point that, within the decision tree, or, with an outbreak in town, as mentioned earlier, if we see a high spike in outbreaks, from out of, around town, potential areas where gen workers could, see themselves, then I think that decision tree could ultimately implement, the self-screening process. You take your temperature, because you're seeing a rise in town, which ultimately means there could potentially be a rise, within the cotton gin. So I think all 3 of them could potentially work. I think the decision tree could be the major solution, with having solutions 2 and 3 kind of built within the decision tree.
Okay. This is a good interaction, but we need to move on with our other comments. So I appreciate if y'all would, coordinate with your faculty advisor and your client and discuss this further when y'all have a chance. Let's have a
Russell, can I say one thing real fast?
Sure.
I am currently planning on being there for the 23rd class. So you mentioned something about that. It made me think of that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So Mr. Green's going to actually be in town on the 23rd. I kind of wanted to gauge who is going to present in person. You guys, at least one team will be presenting in person, so you won't just be sitting here with me and Dr. Castell. So that's good. Okay, thank you. All right, your team, make your comments.
When they were discussing the decision tree, I would have liked to see kind of a visual representation of what that might look like. Obviously, I know they're still kind of hammering out the details, but maybe just some other decision trees that don't relatively have to be related to the topic, just so we can get an idea of what that would look like and where it could be placed.
Yes, that was definitely. I have examples that I was trying to use in the presentation I was having. They were all formatted in a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and trying to format that image onto the PowerPoint. It was making it where you basically couldn't read any of the words. I was trying to recreate it in a way that everybody could get an example of what an industry has already implemented in terms of a decision tree. But yes, we have been utilizing, and I wish I had been able to find a way to show an example so that you could better understand what we're discussing.
Okay, good. And I know y'all have other comments, but just write them on your form. We're going to go on with instructor comments, and then we'll switch over. It was a good presentation, pretty long, about 19 minutes. You guys had a lot to say. Your presentation was very well developed, I felt like. It was organized well. You're talking. Your presentation style is much more comfortable. I think you've even improved over the first one. Damien, your voice is really good and solid. You must have some good sound equipment. Dylan, you were talking kind of fast and a bit of a monotone, but still you got your point across well. I think some of the comments I have already kind of been made pretty clear. It was a little confusing when you jumped to this slide about which was solution 1, solution 2, and solution 3. Let me ask a question of Damien. What would you do differently on this slide now?
Yeah, so that was one thing I meant to get to, and I lost track of that. But instead of solution 1, 2, and 3, just give like a brief description on which one was which.
Yeah,
add that to the title. Yes,
that's a pretty common error. Is that you guys are all wrapped around. You guys are meeting for hours on this, and on your team, everybody knows that potential solution 1 is the decision tree, and so you assume that everybody you're presenting to knows that too. So don't fall into that trap. Some pictures on the flow analysis may have been good. I realize, Doug, you said that you reached out to some people for some data and didn't get it. I would say be persistent. Go to your client. He can probably give you some pictures and some data. I would have liked to seen an analysis that focused on areas of where are the employees the most concentrated in the gym. Let's focus on that. Maybe around the module feeder or at the bale press. There are some gyms that have bale presses that need 5 people. Others, they just need 1. So, you can focus on areas where employees are concentrated and recommend that you upgrade your bale press to where you only need 1 employee. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but those are the sorts of things I was thinking about with regard to content. Otherwise, Doug, you mentioned in the flow analysis some kind of outside analysis with regard to pod-style housing.
Yes, sir.
That is not something that we understand what it is. So a picture or an explanation of that would have been good. And I don't think we have time for it now. So just be cognizant of that. I'll let Dr. Castell make some comments on the swap over.
Very quickly, I second what Professor McGee said, and really the reason you got so many questions from your client is because there were not enough specifics. Again, pictures, diagrams, that you did a good job, you have great content. This is a very relevant and current problem. So you have a lot of good ideas, but I think you did not present them clearly enough that the audience will immediately figure out what is the best solution. Again, so all these problems that have been addressed. I had a question: which solution addresses the housing issue, and what about the truckers and so forth? So if you had presented a flow diagram on the movement of workers, I think there's a lot of tools where you can do that. So check with your client and your advisor. Maybe there are some tools where you can actually next time present us with a nice flow chart of the decision tree and the diagram and so forth. But good job with presenting, but the lack of specifics was a problem with this presentation. Otherwise, good job.